So, Cliff, Luzifer, what did you think?
Um, so I had slightly mixed views about this film, although I think it's a superb film that I would highly recommend watching. Um, I mean, I've really been struggling to try and work out what this film is really about, and because I do find there's a lot of ambiguity in it, which isn't a bad thing per se. I like some ambiguity, but I've really struggled to try and understand what it is that I watched. I mean, it reminded me, there were times when it really reminded me of kind of in tone of Antichrist. And also there were times when it really reminded me tonally of Stalker as well. And so, I love both those films. And so that the tone of it definitely I found interesting. I mean, clearly there are some very clear themes, the most obvious one being kind of capitalism and, big business bullying the small people and ruining the environment, chopping all the trees down. So that's the kind of obvious theme. There's the kind of critique, if you like, of religion. It definitely isn't saying anything positive about religion, I think. And there's something about alcoholism. I mean, obviously there's alcoholism and addiction. And then there's kind of mental health generally. No one, well, certainly the same two characters, the main two characters don't seem to be, they've got kind of problems, emotional. There are big issues. And so, that's quite a hodgepodge of themes. And as I say, I found this a really compelling film. I was totally engaged with it. Never once was I bored. It's an amazing film to watch, but it left me with a bad taste at the end. So, it was interesting to pause and think, I know this is a really well-made film that is really worth watching, but it's like, why have I got this bad taste in my mouth? I mean, I think that, the meaning about, in the end, the kind of point about capitalism and environment is all very obvious. And the drones and, that's very obvious. The kind of how religion can become distorted and how people can end up following these ridiculous rituals that, that's kind of clear in this film as well. The thing that most confused me was that this was, an alcoholic who was in recovery from alcoholism and clearly had kind of rituals related to staying clean and sober. And I'm puzzled about the meaning of this. In some ways I like it, but it's like, it left me confused. I thought the acting was great between these two. I mean, obviously we've seen Frank Rogowski in two other films that we've reviewed recently, Undina and Great Freedom. And I think actually I liked his performance in both of those films more, because in some ways this was a harder film for him to act in because he has such limited dialogue. But I think the chemistry between him and his mum was really strong, and I think the acting was good, but it was kind of a flatter performance than we've seen from him in those previous two films that we've seen. I mean, this film is just so weird. People acting in such a strange way, that the vet, when she visits and that they end up having sex, and, it's just also kind of weird. And I did wonder actually if because clearly he liked his mum, he loved his mum, and he really had a good relationship with the vet. But it kind of felt like both were potentially abusing him or exploiting him sexually, because, you know, it appears that Johannes was like a child. And so, you know, these two women acting, because even the mother, I thought at times it was quite erotic and sexual. I found that slightly unsettling, you know, but, and, you know, how he, when she's ill and he has no idea how to take care of her, and how, you know, what happens as a result of that, and why he does that, you know, it's all so uncertain and baffling and unsettling. I thought I was disappointed with the very final shot, because in a way I thought all these drones, I thought the drones actually in the film were really interesting, because I didn't mention the score, but I really liked the score from this film. I think in some ways it was the score that it was the score and the natural environment that made me think of Stalker. I think the score was really effective in creating an atmosphere. And the drones really added to the score, because the score was pretty monotonal and kind of more like sound effect and unnerving one note music. But the drones would, you know, were quite, in a way, they're quite musical, they're quite loud, and, you know, so they were part of the soundscape as well. And but the actual very final scene, I felt was just, you know, when the drones, all the drones came over the hill, it just felt a bit over the top. And then the one drone coming to the camera, and, you know, the camera is watching you, it just felt a little bit clunky, cliched. I don't know. I kind of didn't like the end. I think overall, the bad taste was that it feels like I find it hard to find anything in this film other than a really negative interpretation of the ending. This is a really depressing film about troubled people just living this almost tortured life. And it's brilliantly done, really compelling, really well made. But just as a matter of taste, I don't like it. I did feel actually that there were moments in it when you did feel the kind of divinity of the area. And sometimes when they were praying, you know, in the mountains, it felt like there was a presence of something divine, but there was clearly also an evil presence as well in it. And it feels like evil won out in the end in this film. And, you know, my own taste is that I would have preferred, you know, I think Stalker has, you know, incredible spiritual undertones. And that's just a matter of taste, because I'm quite spiritual, and, you know, so I like that in a film. It felt like this film was nothing but negative and nothing but evil. And, you know, that may be to some people's taste. And I think it's really well made and, you know, well worth watching, highly recommended. And I'm really fascinated to know what you think of it.
Well, although I really like the freaky synth score that reminded me of The Shining, and the arresting visuals, the whole film is captivatingly strange and unnerving, but it didn't cohere for me at all. And I have quite major problems with it. I really love this aesthetic, though. It reminded me of Panos Cosmatos more than anyone, those mad films he made in the last few years, particularly Mandy. There is a kind of freakish oddness and unnerving mysticism to the film that I really enjoy, and I find that really compelling. But the problem I had was that the film felt to me all tone. It's all atmosphere. And the whole film felt like Prelude. The whole film felt like the first 10 minutes, like a setup that should have taken 15 minutes, where you're introduced to the enjoyably mythical-ish existence of these peculiar outsiders. You know, that should have been the setup, and instead it was the whole film. And there were what felt like, to me anyway, two false starts where I felt like he was finally going to go on the quest that would make up the bulk of the narrative. The first, when his mother sent him to the church with the money, And I thought that would be the quest where the story's about to happen, but it sort of comes and goes quite swiftly. Then about an hour in, there's the attack from the people who are trying to expand the ski slopes. And just before the attack, the mother tells him about this vision she's had. And there's Johannes with a gun and these children, and there's a waterfall with a body at the bottom. And you know, there's this cave that we keep returning to. Where is the devil? Where is the devil? And so I assumed that was going to be what happened to him. And it's not. Instead, what happens is we become like Johannes, lost in his indecipherable rituals. And there is a central problem, I think, there is a fine line when you are portraying a character with learning difficulties. When it goes bad, you end up with Sean Penn in I Am Sam, you know, and it's unwatchably bad, right? And it's a very fine line. And there were moments when Rogovsky's idiocy I found kind of silly and annoying and borderline offensive. And so the performance is inherently problematic. That's just comes with the territory, I think, and is not necessarily a criticism. You either go with it and it works or it doesn't. I don't think there's any problem with having a go. For me, it didn't work. And more problematic was because of his simplicity, there's no emotional impetus. All Johannes understands is bad things are happening. And he is so absorbed in these mad rituals that make no sense beyond his own interior existence that I found it impossible to kind of engage with at the level of story. I could admire the aesthetic, I could admire the idiosyncrasy and imagination and creativity of it, but I just wasn't involved with the story, and I did find it boring. I was just kept waiting for it to happen. The uneasiness that came with his performance combined for me with the really disturbing and ugly incestuous sexuality that pervades the whole film. I felt to know, I mean, you kind of made my eyebrow raised a little bit when you said it left you with a bad taste in your mouth and you didn't know why. I mean, very clear why, right? There's this relationship. This is a film that's not so much a critique of religion as a portrait of madness and abuse. You know, this is a straightforwardly abusive relationship. This boy his development, such as it is, has been entirely retarded by this completely mad mother who has, yes, found a way to manage her own personal demons, but her way of doing so is fantastically repressive and tyrannical. You know, it's a film about abuse with no happy ending. And films that describe that trajectory are tough. They're very tough. And in a way, there's something almost distasteful about presenting a narrative like that with such beautifully arresting visuals. That, for me, is what left me feeling uneasy, is that the aesthetic is captivating, the subject matter is deeply troubling and should be really upsetting, and is. That said, there's a lot to admire about the sheer bravura of the film. I really like the bird called Arthur, the strange, whispery voiceover, those terrific panoramas, fantastic shots of nature. The visuals are extraordinary. The score is fantastic. This story is perverse and strange and disturbing and odd, and put together, that should equate to the sort of film I kind of naturally admire. But for me, I couldn't see I found it ultimately distasteful in the way that wasn't productive to me. And I found the storytelling strangely inept and inert. There just wasn't enough story there to make the visuals, to get up. Once you got over how bravura and arresting those visuals were, there's an emptiness in it, I think, and a kind of storytelling ineptitude at its heart.
That's so interesting, because it's like I can, go along with almost everything that you're saying, but clearly I've had a different experience when I watched it. I think I was seduced by how well it was made. So that this bad taste I had at the end of the film was, I clearly knew something wasn't right, but I'd been seduced by this stunning film, and I was never bored, actually. That is a big difference that we do have. I found it really compelling, and it kept my interest all the way through. but when you come at it from your angle and kind of focus on the abuse and the exploitation, it actually is. And maybe that's the film's success, if you like. Maybe that is what he was trying to do. Maybe I fell for it. The film is actually a really dark, negative film, but it's like playing a trick on you, that it seduces you into kind of enjoying it. But I kind of, if you'd have reviewed first, I may have the tone of my review might be slightly different, because I do agree with you. It really bothered me, the sexuality in this film. Even when he has sex with the vet, which at face value is it doesn't feel as abusive as the mother. The mother, it's kind of really weird, whereas there's something very natural about the sex they have, and it's on top of a mountain, and it's it's kind of a idyllic. But I did think, actually, at that moment in the film, he's like a child, so you shouldn't really be thinking this is idyllic, because it's not. This is abuse. So I think that makes it an interesting film, actually, for me anyway. I mean, obviously you found it more boring than me, but I think it's interesting that it's done that to me. But why would you want to do it? Why would you want to kind of do that to someone if I'm right, that the filmmaker enjoys tricking me into kind of enjoying the beautiful aesthetics of this film and the kind of interesting themes, and then just leaves me with this horrible feeling of this abuse, which just isn't resolved in any way. So I think so you wouldn't recommend this film?
I don't know. I wouldn't go as far as to say I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's interesting and it's provocative. Yeah. I mean, the only time I would say, like, I would definitely not recommend a film is if it's a bad film, a straightforwardly bad film. I don't think this is a bad film. It's just one I didn't particularly enjoy or understand, and it's got problems, but it's very skillfully made.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, in terms of the abuse, it's interesting, I think, to imagine the roles reversed, to imagine the genders reversed. If it was a father and daughter relationship, I think it might be more straightforwardly obvious that we're watching rape and sexual abuse. And even with the vet, if the vet were a man and Johannes were a girl,
yes,
that too looked like rape.
Yes.
That in itself is interesting, I think.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, I'm going to be reviewing Titania next time by Julia Ducournau. And so until the next time.